Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Moose. Our session today is about empowering major gift officers by using Power Automate to help ease some data entry into Blackbaud CRM. We are at a pretty full session in terms of time, but enough time left with questions. So I will give just another minute in case we have anyone else jumping in, and then I'll go ahead and start from there. Okay. So the goal of the use case behind what I'll be sharing with you all today was due to some feedback that I was hearing some other CSMs, just people having trouble getting their development officers and fundraisers to actually add all of their interactions into CRM, update steps, update their plans, and things of that nature. So what we wanted to do is highlight how the Power Platform, specifically Power Automate, can be used along with the Blackbaud CRM Sky API endpoints to bring this data into maybe to bring it to their fingertips in a little bit of an easier or more consumable way so that it helps eliminate a lot of that, just the people not getting into the system and updating their data. So the way that ended up being implemented, let me go ahead and share my screen. Was through the use of a Power App that is linked into Teams. So this could have been, the end goal here could have been accomplished in a few different ways. There could have been some kind of bulk email maybe going out to someone every day saying like, here's your upcoming steps. Do you need to update any, or do you need to add new? That could have been maybe like a one-off form. But I really wanted something ideally that was coming into Teams. That's what we were hearing a lot of people were using to some degree, but that hopefully kind of surface it all in one place. So this app is just pinned to the left side of my Teams, and it is reading me as a signed in user. And so it then filters out all the other prospects in the system and only shows those where I am assigned as the prospect manager. So then it has a couple little tiles here just to make the page a little bit more visually appealing. I can see all of their planned or pending steps. If I change this to one of my other prospects, I'll see that the data up here updates, and then all of their upcoming steps update as well. And then from here, I can either click on an objective if I actually need to make an update. Hang on, I think I need to reshare so you all can see my whole window, my whole screen. There we go. So what that just brought up after I clicked on that link, here, I'll go back and do it again just for the full effect. But it is just taking me directly to this step where I can either go ahead and mark it complete from here or edit and add any other details. So that's one option. But then they also have the option now to add a completed interaction or step that would be linked to an existing plan if there wasn't anything that just already existed that we needed to mark as completed. So I can say add completed interaction step, choose whether I want it to go in as only an interaction or also a step. If it's going in as a step, I'll have to choose the plan that it needs to be linked to and the stage, and all the other fields will be the same if it was just an interaction. So really here, again, with the end goal of just surfacing this data in a little bit of an easier way to get to So that hopefully what it actually ends up doing is drive or increasing overall usage, because they are getting into the system more to update those steps. Once you're here, it's very easy to just maybe go ahead and go to the plan and change something or go somewhere else, and take away some of the obstacles that are keeping people from actually just going in and updating that data as it is. All right. I'm going to stop sharing again and reshare with just one window so I won't get any weird pop-ups that I'm not preparing for. Okay. All right, so now let's look into that a little bit. So here is my actual app. So the first thing I had to do in order to be able to do anything, whether that was doing something that was more like an email summary notification or sharing it through like a Teams channel chat where you might have like a bot, going out to someone each day, being like, here are your upcoming steps, how to actually start getting the data out. So the first thing that I needed was a way to link up my prospects to my fundraisers. So I have a Power Automate flow out here. Just have it select fundraisers. And right now, the trigger in this is just a trigger coming from Power Apps, meaning Power Apps is the one that is making it run. Once it loads up, thank you in advance for all of your patience waiting for these load screens. Tried having them preloaded before, but then they end up canceling themselves out and I have to reload it anyway. So best to just be patient. All right. And then when I get here, I'm using the Blackbaud Sky add-ins connector. And within that, the send an HTTP request action, which allows me to access any of our Blackbaud Sky API endpoints. To call, what I ended up choosing was a query. So talking through that a little bit, or kind of like why I ended up going that route, there is an available endpoint out here for search for prospects. This one gets me pretty close to what I need. So it's going to list all of my prospects, their ID, and it lists the prospect manager, but what it doesn't have is a prospect manager ID. So when I initially started into this and was looking at this, and I was like, that's just not going to get me quite what I want. And I could have, tried to maybe do some searching for prospect managers matching to that name that is returned. But if you happen to have people with similar names, then, it just increases the overall complexity of what you'd have to match against. So what I decided to do instead was use this list ad hoc query entries endpoint and just build a query that's going to list all of my prospects and who their current prospect manager is and their IDs. So that way I have at least at a minimum kind of all of those data points that I would need in order to start doing something else. So this over here is my query. And so initially, I was just had it kind of limited on like looking at people who are active with an active prospect manager. And I was just bringing in these first 4 fields here. So I'll talk about these others as I go along as to what the impact or reasoning for bringing that in. But so I've got my prospect, their ID, fundraiser, their ID, and then I need to actually start getting this data. So through this action, I'm able to call that query specifically, use a parse JSON action to just get that data back into a readable, consumable format for us. And then I'm using a select action to pull from the rows endpoint or the rows field and to get my actual data from there. So if we actually take a look at what this endpoint looks like when it's returned, you can see here that, you have the data returned in a way where you have uh, a field for like a key pair for field, and then all the fields, all the field names, if you renamed anything, and then all the rows. So all of the actual data is kind of returned into its own object. This is a little bit different than the way we normally see data returned, where you have this key value pairing just already built into that JSON response in a nice, clean way. So what you can do though, is by just pulling the data from the rows where I know I have, just the data fields, I can manually type out what I want kind of my column or header names to be, and then use the item function and the position of where that data element is to get all of the pieces in here. So my prospect ID is my first field here in the query. So that ends up being item 0. So everything starts at 0 and then goes up from there. So that's just basically all I've got going through here. And then I'm going to take that data and send it back to Power Apps. So whenever it's initially getting populated, that's happening due to the onStart function within Power Apps. So just as soon as the app starts, wherever I'm loading that from, or if I was doing like a refresh, it's going to go through and create this collection, which is just a table, by running this Power Automate flow, and then getting all of that same data. And by using the parse JSON function within Power Apps, I can bring that data back into a readable format. Everything coming from Power Automate to Power Apps in that response comes through in a string format. So it's formatted with a lot of extra brackets, slashes, quotes, just things that we don't need. But using this parse JSON action or function here makes it able to read it in a very normal way. So after that happens, what it creates is this table down here that has all of the pieces that I need to actually go forward with this. So the next part is looking at setting my variable for user email. So this is reading, this user function is another Power Apps function where it's reading me as the signed in user, and then adding or grabbing my email address and adding that as a variable. So the way that it knows to then limit who is actually showing up here is on this field itself. This is just my prospect drop-down field. I am filtering that table to anywhere that it has my email address. So in order for that part to work, I had to make sure there was actually something in CRM that was storing that email address and that I could then return it at the same time when I'm getting my other fundraiser and prospect data. So what you would want to do is create a specific email type that you can pull only to be used for this purpose, because it's possible that the email address that you're getting read as like a signed in user somewhere is slightly different than what your actual email address is. So for example, my true email address is ashley.moose@blackbaud.com. But my email address, the way that it is through the system, just being an old format, it's still ashley.smith@blackbaud.me. So in order for something like this to work in your CRM, you would need to have all of your fundraisers set up to have that same email address on their records. Maybe it's always something that's consistent, like a university email address, to where you can pull that and know that it'll accurately be able to link back and filter the appropriate records for you. All right, so then after I get my prospects in here, I have it filtered to me. The next thing is to bring in my steps down here. So at the same instance, let me just expand this a little bit. So this is all in the app start. So we're going through the first part. I'm getting my prospects, setting my email address from the same kind of process or in the same steps. I'm selecting what my prospect ID and fundraiser ID are. And then for the prospect, I'm creating this var prospect variable because whenever I go to get my step data, I'm going to need to know what that prospect ID is. So all of this data is coming in from another Power Automate flow. So this one's coming in through my get prospect data. All right, which in here, using that same send an HTTP action to call the get prospect plans list endpoint. So this guy over here, list prospect plans. But we can see here that a required parameter of that is the constituent ID. So I have to know who my initial prospect is going to be before I can actually run this flow and have any results. So this is taking input from the Power App with that prospect ID variable. And then it is using that data to actually serve as the input when we're calling that list prospect plans endpoint. So anytime after something has been added as an input field up here, it will then become available in the dynamic content window down here in Power Automate. So once I've added that, as long as I'm sending something through on the Power App side, then I'll have that prospect ID to use. And then similarly, I'm then going forward and getting the plan steps using the list prospect steps endpoint here. So whenever it gets returned back, it gets returned back in a very similar way to the other pieces we were looking at. But I end up with a grouped table here of all of my planned and pending steps. And that planned and pending portion of this is just by nature actually of the endpoint itself. So this list prospect plans endpoint prospect steps, I don't know the right one before. It is only returning those steps that are planned and pending. So there's not any additional filtering or anything happening to remove those that are completed or no longer applicable. All right, and so once that comes through, the other piece I have that I need to show kind of for my summary or dashboard view here is their prospect summary and giving summary. And this is really just, optional to make it a little bit more interesting or, to make sure that you're not missing out on something that's changed with the prospect that you need to follow up on. But in order to get this data in, similarly to bringing in the step data, I need to know who my prospect is to start with. So it's not something that I could have initially, I need to know, let me back up a little bit. If I was going to use some of the initially available endpoints, I would have needed to know who that prospect was to start with. So whenever I was first going through and trying to figure out how I wanted to bring this data in, the first thing I looked at was this view a prospect status endpoint. So that would give me exactly what I need in terms of knowing the prospect status out here. So qualified, signed, so forth. But in order to actually use that endpoint, I would have had to have my prospect selected again, and then potentially either send that through in another Power Automate flow or add it into my flow that's getting the step data. I didn't really want to add it into the flow that was getting the step data, since that could have increased the overall processing time, and trying to, make sure that this was showing up very quickly in case someone was moving through different people. And I didn't really want to do another flow, although that would have been fine, really. But what I thought about was, at least for prospect status, that field was a one-to-one relationship with my prospect. So I could really just add that as another field that I'm getting from my initial query. So that's the first part that I tagged on here, is the prospect status. So then I was looking to bring in my giving information. And while there are other similar endpoints available, like this view individual revenue summary, I decided to do something similar and just use smart fields. So back into this query here, and one is actually just a count on a field, but I have smart fields to look at my largest lifetime and last gift information. So that worked fine for what I was needing for here. And it means that in terms of performance, it comes through a little bit quicker. There could have been other scenarios where getting it from that, revenue summary endpoint would have been better. So it's just good to be aware that you have different options. Maybe just using the endpoint is not always the answer. Sometimes it can be the answer, but sometimes there might be another way to get that data in here as well. So now you'll see, if I just switch here, the summary information changes right away, because that data is all actually here, because it was in that first initial load with the prospects and fundraisers. And then the step data eventually loads on through. So when you're seeing any kind of, delay like that, that's where just being cognizant of what your processing times or issues are is something that can be useful. And then the last piece here, actually adding the data. So this is just a button that once clicked is going to bring up my other little form out here. The way these two interact with each other is everything in this form is part of a group. And the visibility here is set to, if a variable called showIf is set to true, then it will display, otherwise it will not. So when I'm clicking on this first button, the only thing I'm actually doing is just changing this variable to actually be true. And then conversely, for cancel, I'm just changing it back to false. So that way it just makes these fields visible or not visible in either situation. So from an end user perspective, it seems like a normal pop-up form, but you're not having to go through a different screen or anything like that. So if I'm have that built out in here, and in order to bring the data or get the data from here and take it anywhere else, I would need another Power Automate flow. All right, so in here, the first thing I did was add a condition to say whether the type is equal to step or not. If it is, then I'm going to call the post prospect step endpoint. If it's not, then I'm going to call the post interaction endpoint. So that's looking at both this create prospect steps. So create a prospect step and create constituent interactions. And since underline the way these forms are in CRM, steps are optionally interactions and vice versa, a lot of the fields and everything that you need are really the same. So once I was able to go through it and build out this response, there's just a couple things that are different. So on the step side, I have to have a plan ID instead of the constituent ID. You need the plan stage, and then a couple of the fields are just renamed a little bit differently. So I added all of those fields in back up here again to serve as my input. So data that I'm going to be feeding it from the app side over to Power Automate. And then this has to flow back in just in the order that I have it here. So we can see here I've got plan ID, type, summary. And if I check on my add button over here, that's what I've got going in this order. So this is all one big if statement for populating the plan ID. So in scenarios where I'm adding it as an interaction and not a step, I'm going to be passing something, so I have to account for the scenario if it's blank. Then the type, whether it's a step or an interaction, and so forth. So once all of that is in, it is, and that's pretty much it for what is in this dashboard. When I was initially building it out, I wanted to add a way that there could have been a mark completed button or something just directly added into the row, just to add a little bit more options of what they could do without having to get into CRM. The only reason I wasn't able to go forward with doing that is just there's currently you're not able to use that send an HTTP action with patch endpoints. And since I would be updating a step, then that would be a patch endpoint. That should change in the future, though, as either that connector functionality changes or any new connector specific to CRM functionality might become available. So then we could actually have an additional button just linked directly here onto this area where someone could mark this step as completed. And then one maybe last thing, kind of you're working with this a little bit more on the Power Apps side, but working in a table like this one, I have a couple different options for how I wanted to display this data. So when I first started to build it out, I noticed there was this new option for to just add a data table, which really is just adding a table that has your header in here, all of your fields. You can choose to hide different columns, display different columns. The one thing you could not do, though, was have there's other things you could not do, but for this specific use case, was have that button be able to link into a row where it could run some kind of update specific to that row data. So instead, all of this is built into a container. So you can see that container is highlighting this whole area. And then container 2 is my header. And then gallery 3 is my actual collection data. So all of my step data that went into that collection that we looked at over here. And then in order to kind of make everything play together nicely, so I've got all of the fields. You have to repeat fields between your container and your gallery, because this is just like a text field saying that this is called plan type, whereas the data here is actually bringing that data in from somewhere. So what I do with anything that I'm adding into the gallery section, I go ahead and set it to both have an X value equal to the corresponding container field, so label status, and also the width value. So if I'm having to move fields around or try to make things smaller or larger, so example for like objective, I needed that to be a little bit longer so that as much of it could fit in here as possible. Whenever I, start to just move this field around now, everything else below it is going to drag along with that due to that X function. And if I decide that I want status to be a little bit longer for whatever reason, you'll see that the data out here also starts to just automatically adjust itself to the right to account for that. All right. So, any questions, or anything you might want me to dive back into? All right. Well, in that case, we can go ahead and end early. One second, might have, I think, a question from Nichols here. Okay, so the question about, does the planned and pending steps show all steps related to the constituent regardless of fundraiser, or only the steps that the fundraiser is an owner on? It shows all steps associated to that plan. So I don't have any additional filtering on it there to show only those where the person is assigned as the fundraiser, but you could have added another filter to remove any of those, so only those would have displayed. All right. Well, I think that might have been our only question. So in that case, thanks all.